I mean, I actually last week I almost spoke about Tazria, and that was close enough. Like right. And I told you the chances of me talking about Mitzvah were nil. Right. So today's topic, it's not going to be clear from anything over here. So let's start by the beginning. First of all, today's shir is sponsored by Shuli Hastin. Shuli, we're going to have to bother her to start coming back to the shir again. Shuli used to come every week. Shuli was a student of mine in Bar Ilan, I don't know how many years ago. And her husband also, they met there on the program. Her husband is Josh Hastin. So it's for the refuah shlema for her father, the refuat Chaim Yisachar ben Esther Malka. And also Joshua ben Esther, in memory of his father, his Yortzeit for his father, Pinchas Eliyahu ben Yaakov Yosef. So it should be Refuah Shlema and Lahavdil. It should be Le'iloi Nishmato. And let's learn. The title or the topic, which is not written for you, is Rabbi Akiva's Seder. Okay, that's one of the famous episodes from the Haggadah. We'll get there. You'll have to give me a little bit of time till we get there, but that's where we're headed. But first I want to start with something which I so apologize for this word, but is more authentic. So here's a little secret. The story of Rabbi Akiva, which is in the Haggadah, right, the story of the rabbis who went and had the Seder in Bnei Brak, there's no source for that. No, having no source for that is not the biggest issue, because we know not every single book that existed in antiquity made it down to modern times. But my point is, it's not in the Mishnah, it's not in the Gemara, it's not in the Bavli, it's not in the Yerushalmi, it's not in the Tosefta, it's not in the Medrash Halacha, it's not in the Medrash Haggadah, which means we do not have the source for that. The only source that exists for that is the Haggadah of Pesach, which that itself is interesting. Now, there is a different source, and I said the other source is more authentic. It's more authentic for two reasons. One is just based upon the last couple of words that I said. It's actually in the rabbinic sources. It's here staring at us in the Tosefta, but there's a second issue. First, I'll read it, and then I'll explain it. Ein maftir nachar Pesach afikoman. Now, that's a line that some of you should recognize. This is Perek Yud, towards the end of the Masechta. Kigon egozim tmarim uklayot. So let's pause there for a second. So we know that this is what we say to the wise son, and that, by the way, is in the Medrash Halacha, and that is, as an answer to the wise son, is in the Medrash Halacha, in the Mechilta. And this line itself is also paralleled in the Mishnah. So what actually does it mean? The Pesach in this context is the Korban Pesach. And that's also something which is really interesting, that along the way we kind of lost the language. On a Torah level, and we've said this many times, on a Torah level, the word Pesach only refers to the actual bringing of the offering and the day or the time that offering is brought. The 7-day holiday is always referred to as Chag HaMatzot, and there are two separate, interconnected holidays. One of them is Pesach, and one of them is Chag HaMatzot, and part of the complexity of the interrelationship is something that we're going to speak about. But over here, when we're answering the wise son, or just over here as a general rule, what's the rule? Ein maftir nachar Pesach. Once you eat the Korban Pesach, then you should not eat anything else. And afikomen, what does afikomen mean? Most likely it means dessert. So now it's funny, because now we turn the afikomen into the matzah, which replaces the Korban Pesach, and then we think the afikomen is something which you do eat. Well, the thing it says about the afikomen is you can't eat an afikomen, which means the taste of the Korban Pesach should be lingering in your mouth, the taste of redemption, the taste of geula. And it gives examples. Kagon egozim tamarim. Okay, period. Chayav adam lasok behilchot Pesach kol halayla. A person is obligated to be involved in the study of the laws of Pesach all night. Now, there's a couple of things that we need to pay attention to. One is, again, getting way ahead of ourselves. There is an argument as to until which point can you eat the Korban Pesach. The opinion of Rabbi Akiva is until the morning. the opinion of Elazar ben Azariah is only until midnight. The halacha, presumably, is like Rabbi Akiva. And over here, we're just told anonymously that a person is obligated to be involved in the study of the laws of Pesach. Now, when I told you that there are two things about this, one more authentic than there's more authentic than the other teaching, during the time that the Beit HaMikdash stood, the central star of the night was the Korban Pesach. The celebration all revolved around the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach was time-consuming. The Korban Pesach was religiously significant, and everything that we did surrounded that. So it's interesting over here that so far everything here as well is about the Korban Pesach. After you eat the Korban Pesach, you don't do anything else. Even after you eat the Korban Pesach, you still should be involved in studying the rules of the Pesach all night. Eventually, at some point, we're not going to have the Korban Pesach anymore. And once we don't have the Korban Pesach, that itself could be completely traumatic religiously. How do we continue on? What do we do? And it's at that point that we find a shift in focus. And the shift in focus is from this Pesach-centric experience to something took its place. And what took its place is something which was always there. Because I don't want to misstate this, mislead, but it's a question of focus and also quality. Maybe some quantity as well, and that is Tzipor Yetziat Mitzrayim. Tzipor Yetziat Mitzrayim, telling the story, was always there. But it's as we had more to do, we had less to talk, and as we have less to do, then we have more to talk about and more time to talk, and the talking becomes the centrality as opposed to the doing. So that itself, that shift, is something which for us, on the one hand, it's obvious, but on the other hand, maybe we don't realize how important it is. So that's why I said this teaching over here, starting with after the Korban Pesach, right? The Pesach is central, and afterwards you're chayiv la'asok behilchot Pesach, and then it goes on and it explains chayiv adon la'asok behilchot Pesach kol laila, afilu beino levein beno, afilu beino levein atzmo, afilu beino levein talmido. That we need to discuss the laws of Pesach, and again, your mind can very easily misread that or read something else into it because it's more familiar to us to say, oh, what you need to do is be involved in Tzipor Yetziat Mitzrayim, but that's not what it says. Ma'aseh b'Rabban Gamliel u'zakenim shayu mesubin b'beit baitus ben zunin belud v'hayu asukin behilchot haPesach kol halayla ad krot together. And they were there all night until the rooster was crowing. Higbiyum lefneim v'nodu v'alchu lahen lebeit HaMidrash. And then it ends up over here. Then they go to the Beit Midrash and start the morning prayers. And you realize that's very similar to the story that we know about Rabbi Akiva in Bnei Brak. This is Rabban Gamliel in Lud. But over here, they're being osek in Hilchot HaPesach. And then it ends up with Ezu hi Birkat HaPesach. What bracha do you say on the Pesach? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu asher kiddushanu mitzvah v'tzivanu le'achol HaPesach. So you do realize everything about this section focuses on the Korban Pesach, and that is really what we need to pay attention to. Look at source number 2, because you're familiar with this, except for one small little part. Tanur Rabbanon Chacham Shoalo V'meino Chacham Ishto Shalto, which means if your son knows how to ask, your son asks. If not, then your wife asks. By the way, what's asked? The imlav hu shol la'atzmo v'yafilu shnei talmidei chachamim sheyodin behilchot haPesach. Notice, know about the laws of Pesach. Sholim zed zeh. And what do they ask? Manishtan alay lazeh mikol leilot. So this itself is really interesting because it's again something which I think we completely don't necessarily pay attention to. But the central part of the Haggadah that we have today is the questions, and then we go about telling the answers. But what actually are these questions, or how are these questions framed? So that was a little subtle just now, but when talking about the Manishtana, it's just now called the Manishtana, an example of asking about Hilchot HaPesach. If you look at source number 3, again, this is the Mishnah. Uva Mikdash hayu meviim lefanav gufo shel Pesach. They bring in the actual Korban Pesach. And then, Mazgulo, next Mishnah, Mazgulo kosheni, you pour the second cup, v'kana ben sholav, and now the son asks, which, by the way, is exactly where our source before picked up from. V'im ein dat baben aviv melamdo. And if the son doesn't know how to ask, the father teaches him, Manishtan alayis mekol elam, right? By the way, that is not about narrative, that is about law. That is about law. Oh, that's a question that kind of got discontinued. That's a question about the Korban Pesach. So these are all questions which are not questioning or discussing necessarily the narrative of what took place. These are all focused around the law. So I'm saying, when I was pointing out, and I called it, and I don't know if you liked it or didn't, I said, oh no, the Tosefta is quite authentic. Because look how authentically it meshes in together with really what the Manishtana is. I'm not concerned now the answers to Manishtana, but look the way that it's connected to the Manishtana. And it continues to say, which is also slightly different. By the way, at that point you could say, oh, that has more to do with narrative. And this Mishnah seems to be saying, okay, the kid is asking regarding the halachot, and we go and we weave in the story as we try to explain the halacha. By the way, it's really easy to do. Why are we eating only tzli? Because we're eating a meat that was roasted very quickly. Why are we eating meat that was roasted very quickly? Because that night we roasted the meat really quickly because we were preparing to leave Egypt, and not only that, we took the blood and put it on the doorposts, and again, so on and so forth. But we weave the halacha into the narrative as well, and that's why I'm saying I really can't disconnect them. Which then tells us the central place that we should be discussing. Rabbi Gamliel, who we may or may not have just seen, the problem with Rabbi Gamliel, as always, is there's more than one Rabbi Gamliel. So which Rabbi Gamliel is this? Is this the one that was during the time of the Beit HaMikdash, or the one which is post-Beit HaMikdash? Presumably the one who's in Lud is post-Beit HaMikdash. Because he's in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, what's he doing in Lud? He should be there. By the way, that is not necessarily an impossible question, but it certainly would create much more intrigue. Which elu? So you're going to think only look forward. Lo yotzei de chovato, and of course now we wonder which obligation have you not fulfilled. Ve'eloin Pesach matzamor. But just notice that those three things reflect three of those questions that we just mentioned in the Manishtana. So the Manishtana, if the kid doesn't know how to ask, teach him the Manishtana, teach them about the halachot, teach them about the Pesach, teach them the matzah, teach them about the mar. But if you don't, meaning, which obligation is he talking about? Apparently he's talking about the obligation of Sipui Tzit Mitzrayim. So according to him, Sipui Tzit Mitzrayim cannot be done unless you discuss these three things, and these three things are halachot. Which means I'm going to say again, there's this really interesting interplay between the story, the narrative, if you will, and the laws. And during the time that the Beit HaMikdash existed, the main thing was the Korban Pesach, but we had to tell a story with it. But the story that was told revolved around the halachot. And at some point, when we don't have this, then a new story, a new narrative origin will somehow be presented. But let's just continue a drop more. Pesach al Shum Pesach al Hamakom Abotei Aboteinu b'Mitzrayim, Matzah al Shum Aboteinu b'Mitzrayim, Mor Shum Shemur HaMitzrayim Chayei Aboteinu b'Mitzrayim. Is that enough? We'll read a drop more. B'chol dor v'dor chayiv adam l'rodatz v'ki'ilu hoyu on Mitzrayim. We need therefore to see ourselves as if we left Egypt. Shenemar v'higada televincha, which is the main point. This is where we get the narrative from. V'higada televincha, tell your kids, b'yomahu lemor ba'avor zeh. What's the avor? What's the zeh? That's very interesting, by the way. What is the zeh? Ba'avor zeh asashem li b'tzeit Mitzrayim. The zeh over here, I don't know how literal to be in terms of the Chumash. What is taking place in chapter 13? Because that's actually pretty surprising. Are we talking about matzah at this point? Are we talking about Are we talking over here already about Pidyon Bechor? You have to take a look a little bit at chapter 13 and realize that this is maybe a little more interesting than you realize. But I'm going to say it again. Is Vigada to Levincha is Bavor Zeh. That could very well be pointing at something. You're pointing at the matzah, you're pointing at the mari, you're pointing at the korban pesach, bavor zeh, which means, I'm going to say it again, that Pesach night is this wonderful combination and merging of halacha and agadah, merging between performance and between narrative. there was a time that the performance was so dominant that the narrative had to take a back seat to it. But even there, it was told. You see, Rabbi Gamliel's point. It had to be told within the laws needed to be explained. The performance needed to be explained. And therefore, this passage is probably more connected to what we just now saw in Tosefta, that Rabbi Gamliel was having his Pesach Seder, and again, what does it say in that Tosefta? Ma'aseh Rabbi Gamliel is going to show you Masumim Beit Lud v'hayu asukim behilchot Pesach. So that should not be a surprise. Now you realize that that's exactly what Rabbi Gamliel is telling us. You need to be involved in Hilchot Pesach. There is an interesting Ramban, which is somewhat obscure. It's in source number 4. It's obscure because it's the Ramban in the back of the Gemara. Well, it used to be in the back of the Gemaras. People don't use those Gemaras anymore. In the back of the Gemaras, you have the pages of the Rif. In the pages of the Rif, you have the Baal Mor, and then you have what's called the Milchamot. Milchamot is written by the Ramban, who over here is touching a side point. The side point is about the Rif at quote of the Gemara regarding the davening vatikin and how important it is to daven right with the break of day. That people will say Shema at the precise time, as I previously explained. But you don't have to repeat it. Meaning that's the best time to do it. But if you didn't do it then, so you missed the best time, you missed the best way. And he writes, Kiyot Seba, we have a similar halachic phenomena. Kol shelo amar shlosh dvar me'elu Pesach lo yotzei yedei chovato. He didn't fulfill his obligation. V'lo she'etzarech lachzor le'achol Pesach matzomar. It's not that you have to go and eat it again. It's very interesting. The Ramban understands Rabbi Gamliel as saying not that you didn't do the mitzvah of Sipur, you didn't do the mitzvah of Achila. That the mitzvah of Achila, the performance requires at least a little bit of narrative. And if you didn't, you still did the mitzvah. You still ate the Korban Pesach. You still ate the matzah. You still ate the mar. Again, we would divide this and say it a little differently. But again, it depends on Gamliel. We today would have said, yeah, you did the mitzvah of Achila, but you didn't do the mitzvah of Sipur. I'm just pointing out that it's possible that the mitzvah of Sipur and Achila were much more tightly connected than we ever realized, especially when you see all the earlier sources, all the Mishnaic sources, that's what it really is. All the sources of the time of the Mishnah are focusing on halachot, and then when the performance of the halachot, ba'avor zeh, you got it, is ba'avor zeh, you have to explain what you're doing. And yes, we know that there's another mitzvah which seems today to be the main mitzvah, and that is l'saper. But now look at the difference between the sources. If you're not clear how to look at the differences, now look at source number 5, which is, before we began, we were much more familiar with this. It says, "Afilu kolanu chachamu kolanu navonu kolanu zakeinu kolanu yodim et Torah mitzvah leinu l'saper b'yitziat Mitzrayim." Now again, you can just go back and take a look again at source number 1 at what it actually said, or look at the Gemara it quoted in source number 2, and what it says there. It's behilchot Pesach, but over here in our Haggadah, it shifts it. In a certain sense, it updates it. It's far more relevant to us today to focus on Sipur and not to focus on the Korban Pesach. We don't have the Korban Pesach, but now you realize this is. I kept using the word authentic before, but for our Pesach experience, this is much more authentic because this is what we need and this is what we do. Again, halacha is gone. Sipur has now taken its place. Masabir Lazabir Yeshua, Bir Lazabin Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, show you Misubim, B'nei Brak. Again, before it was, we saw that they were Misubim in Lud, and now you have this group of people, and Rabbi Gamliel is not here, are Misubim in B'nei Brak. And they were doing the mitzvah of Sipur. They were talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim that entire night. Ad Shabol Talmidayim, until the students came. Then we have the continuation, which maybe was spoken about then. And this is not a Pesach problem. This is an all-year problem in terms of what is the mitzvah of saying Shema at night. And he says, whether you say the third chapter of Shema. The third chapter of Shema you say in the morning because it's do it tzitzit. But what about at night? At night, So is there leaving? Do we talk about this at night? Again, every day of the year, not just Pesach. So there is this obligation every night. So, by the way, this is not to say that Elazar ben Azariah didn't do it. He's just, what is he saying? Te'amer could be that other people will say it because I couldn't convince others that this was correct. Te'amer. So I'm saying the language is interesting, and I'm not going to get that far into what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is saying, but I do want to go back and consider a couple of things regarding, again, this central passage. So where do we begin? First of all, we notice, as I've already said a couple of times, we notice where it's somewhat updated. What were they all doing in Bnei Brak? And there's lots of questions. And by the way, lots of people asked lots of questions. My only disappointment is that each time, I've looked at a bunch of sources on this week, and everybody who asked these questions kinds of make believe that no one ever asked the questions before they that it occurred to them. I mean, whatever. There are people writing today thinking that they've discovered America on this, so it's interesting. Let me just say one more thing about that. There is this common theme where people will say, "Oh, there's a secret behind here." By the way, you can just Google Rabbi Akiva secret Seder. Lots of people like to call it like that. But again, I'm not for a second to it, because the first thing you can ask, and the most obvious, is where's Rebbi Akiva's family? Where's Rebbi Akiva's wife? Where are his children? By the way, simple answer is they were there. What about his students? So the students are there knocking by the doors. Okay, that's interesting. What about these other rabbis? So again, people say, why aren't they with their families? Why aren't they? Maybe their families are there. I don't know what to say, but there is this approach where people claim no, is that this was a secret meeting and they were planning the Bar Kochva rebellion. Now, I'll tell you what's interesting about that. What's interesting about that is I could not find anybody from the time of Rabbi Akiva until the 20th century who actually said that. Which means it's very popular today, and lots of rabbis, and you've all heard it even. I don't have to tell you. The earliest that I saw, and this is not to say that no one said it before, because it's really hard to see such things. But as I said, I searched through as much as I could Haggadot, and I could not find anybody there. And by the way, I did absolutely rely on a computer on this, and I just searched words. I searched Akiva, and I searched Bar Kochva on Haggadah. I searched for Bar Kochva in Haggadah commentaries, right? So maybe I can search better. Maybe I can find more. Maybe. I think I looked both Bar Kochva and Bar Koziba. He's barely called Bar Kochva in Jewish sources. He's first called Bar Koch. Well, he's hinted at in the Yerushalmi, but he's first called Bar Kochva in the Church Fathers already. He's called Bar Kochva, but his real name was Bar Koziba. So as I said, I could have looked, but nonetheless, I didn't find anything obvious. Maybe it's there, and it eluded me. But I do know in the 20th century, the earliest, at least one that I found, was, and there are those who, by the way, also claim that this is a commentary which emerges from the Warsaw Ghetto. And the Warsaw Ghetto uprising is right after this, and that's what they were discussing, the rebellion and what they were therefore saying what was going on there. But the person who already explained it before this was Rabbi Yehuda Leib Maimon. So Rabbi Yehuda Leib Maimon, did you ever hear of him? You know who he was, Rabbi Maimon. Rav Maimon, his real name was Fishman, maybe. Actually, they borrowed Fishman from somebody else. But he's one of the signers of the Megillat Atzmaut. He said Shachianu immediately afterwards. Everyone said Amen to his Shachianu. Both he and in Israel.
1948.
1948.
Oh, 48.
In 1948, the year of Maimon was a minister in Ben Gurion's government. His sister was a member of the Knesset, but she was a Mapainik, all the way on the other side of the political spectrum. The two of them, by the way, made Aliyah together. They traveled together. He had been an orphan at a very young age, and he was raised in the house of the rabbi who was the Malbim. And later on, he gets smicha from the Aruch LaShulchan, and he gets smicha from from Shlomo Cohen from Vilna, who was the Dayan of Vilna, and he was a Maggid. He was a Maggid in a town in Europe, and he was a well-known rabbi. And then at some point he comes to Israel, and he was a Zionist there as well. And he was one of the absolute fathers of religious Zionism, and he was the kind of person that if Ben Gurion did something he didn't like, he quit. Mm-hmm. So that's it. I'm going home. I can't. No, but they don't quit. He did, and Ben Gurion then had to crawl back to him and to beg him to continue. He also tzmicha for this day Chemed. He comes to Israel later on, becomes friendly Rav Kook. He's the one who opened up Mosad Rav Kook. You just heard of him right away. Right after I talk about him, I haven't heard of him. Yeah. Anyway, I found in his writings. And again, I don't want to mislead that I was the first. I found in his writings. That's the interesting thing. I found in other writings as well as other people, but everyone else was after him. There was also like other people at the same time or a little bit afterwards or 1948 or so on. You find other people doing it, which means maybe we got more, I don't want to say militaristic, because some of you may think I'm saying it in a negative way. That became more to our minds of being an army and fighting and rebelling and doing what we need to do. So I'm just saying is that it could be that for many, many years this was not really on one's mind, but it was Rav Maimun then who then conjectures about what must have happened over there. And by the way, one of the people that I mentioned was the Aruch HaShulchan, who he was very friendly with. Aruch HaShulchan has a comment to the Haggadah, and he starts asking, what are these people doing over here? Now, the only reason I didn't bring down the quote from the Aruch HaShulchan is because there were earlier people who kind of asked the same question, but let me at least lay things up a little bit more. In source number 6, the Gemara tells us, this is a Gemara in Sanhedrin talking about looking for a good, solid Beit Din. Tzedek, tzedek, turdov. What does tzedek mean? You should do tzedek in a tzedek way. Tzedek, tzedek, turdov. Make sure that you go to the right place. Rabbi Lezer Lud. So now you know that Rabbi Lezer, Lezer Gadol, he lives in Lud. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Levrachayil. Rabbi Yeshua Lepkin. Rabbi Gamliel Liyavne. Rabbi Akiva Lebnei Brak. So this is one of the sources, and there are others, by the way. The list continues. There are others here. This is one of the sources that tells us, Rabbi Akiva, he lived in Bnei Brak. Now, I just have to say this because we can't miss this. You never know what people will find interesting, right? So where was Bnei? We have Lud. We're going to come back to Lud in a moment, where exactly Lud was. But where was Bnei Brak in those days? Now, Bnei Brak most likely is not where Bnei Brak is now. If you get to the point that the 4 hits the number 1, you have a garbage dump there. There was once a garbage dump, which was called Chiria, which is now it's the Ariel Sharon National Park on a garbage dump. You can do anything you want with that. And that is called, you ready for this? You need a drum roll. That's called Tzomet Misubin. Why is Tzomet Misubin called Tzomet Misubim? Because of the Haggadah. Because Rabbi Akiva, and that's Bnei Brak. The garbage dump is on top of, that's the tell. Wow, I wonder why they ever call it Tzomet Misubin. Why? Because, right? You're saying, and I'm just hoping somebody's here saying, I never thought of that. I mean, but that's the reason. That's what they called the place that Bnei Brak was once, Tzomet Misubin, because that's where they had this incredibly famous Seder. So even though there may have been no footprint of that story in rabbinic literature, there is actually a footprint of that place in terms of... so let us continue now. So in source number 7, so the Maratz Chiyut, by the way, he also has a commentary in the back of the Gemara. On that Gemara in Sanhedrin, where it says that, Rabbi Akiva was in Bnei Brak and Rabbi Lezer was in Lud, so source number 7, it says, Nira Be'enai, Nunbet, Nira Be'enai, Bnei Brak, Hu B'chalkol Shaldan. Now he starts discussing where it is. I mean, he did not have a live Bnei Brak at the time. He has to try to figure it out. He goes, V'lud haytama halach yom achad Yerushalayim. And Lud was closer to Jerusalem. We'll see. Mishnah Ma'aseh we'll look there in a moment, because that Mishnah is going to help us for a different reason. Uv'chakol shel Binyamin. V'ayin Rashi sham v'ata ech yitachen hasipur b'agadat Pesach d'v'lezer Rabbi Akiva she'im mesubim b'nei Brak kol oto halayla hainu lo Pesach hari makom l'shor Rabbi Lezer b'Lud Rabbi Lezer ba'atzmos feirlei mishabeach niyat ha'atzlanim she'enan yotzim mi'bateim b'regon. Rabbi Lezer, aside from that he's supposed to be in Lud, he says, I appreciate people who are quote-unquote lazy, who don't leave their houses. People should be at home for the holidays. Don't leave. People should be at home for the holidays. The Shambas of Asugya, Sipru, Shover Lazar, and so on. We don't need to read at the very end. The Kashim Kain Eich Halach B'Chagamatzo V'Neibach V'Tzarachin Gadol. He goes, I don't understand the story. He goes, what were all these rabbis doing? So, of course, he did not know the interpretation that they were all there discussing the rebellion. I don't remember, other than him just now telling me to look in the Mishnah Maaseh Sheni, I don't remember who else told me to look here. But let's look here for a moment. In Maaseh Sheni Perek, first of all, it tells us that Kerem Revi'i Haya Ola Liyushalayim Alach Yom Achad L'Kol Tzad. That in terms of bringing this particular mitzvah, Tlupa Aretz, bringing it to Yerushalayim, the amount that you would need to travel is 1 day's travel to Jerusalem in every direction. And then it tells us to say about Lud here. Yeah, Lud min Amarav. And Lud is, right, Lud on the western side is a 1 day travel to Jerusalem. So that's what he was referring to, is that Lud is much more inland and is closer to Jerusalem. Now, it continues, we're still in the Mishnah Maaseh Sheni. Mishnah V'Arav, Erev Yom Tov Arishon Shel Pesach, Shel Revi V'Shel Shvi, Haya Bir. There are certain times that you need to do Bir, make certain things, I don't want to get overly technical, make certain things ownerless, right? This has to do with the laws of Maaseh. There's also some things in the laws of Shvi'it about this, that what is the date that you need to make it ownerless, right? That you have to pay your taxes. What is it? It's April 15th. Where does that come from? It comes from Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach is the date that you have to make these things ownerless. And then it tells us a story. Maaseh b'Rabbi Gamliel v'Zakenim. By the way, I hope that turn of phrase now is a little familiar to us. Shayu ba'in b'Sfina. They were traveling on what day? They were traveling on Erev Pesach, and that's a day you have to make it ownerless. And now you're going to see who else is on the boat. Abin Rabbi Gamliel, Isur Shaniatid Lamud, Natan Li Yoshua. Now, Rabbi, this is one of the sources that you know Rabbi Yeshua is a Levi. He says the Maser, this type of Maser is going to go. Maser is going to the Levi. Umakom Muskarlo Isur Acher Shani Atid Lamud Natan Li Akiva ben Yosef, and that was Sheiskebo LaAniyim, and that's for the poor. Either Rabbi Akiva was a Gabbai tzedakah and gave money out to the poor, the way that most understand, or maybe Rabbi Akiva was poor. And but he's being mizaki it for all other poor that may be. But this is fascinating. And by the way, continue. So who's on the boat with him? Who's on the boat with him? Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shua, Rabbi Elazar, and Elazar ben Azariah. So this is all great except for...
Why are they on a boat? I don't understand.
Why are they on a boat? They're traveling. They're coming back from Rome, most likely. They had some kind of meeting that they had to have with the leadership in Rome, and now they're coming back. You can't plan, when you're arriving, when you're on a boat. Travel is not as simple as you think. But what's more interesting is the timing of this. Is the timing and the group. The timing and the group, essentially, if you trade off Rabbi Gamliel for Rabbi Tarfon, you have Rabbi Akiva's group, and I saw somebody claim that they get off the boat, and that's why they all go into Lud. Sorry, that's why they all went to Bnei Brak. They get off the boat, they all go to Bnei Brak, because they just Erev Pesach, that's where they, how far can...
That's why the children and the family...
That's why they're all there together. By the way, it doesn't... So what about Rabbi Gamliel? So you have to say Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi, and he had a better donkey. I don't know what to say. As I said, I've seen people try to connect. This will be our famous theory of conservation of boat travel and Pesach Seders coming together. But again, the timing is also really interesting, because this is Erev Pesach, and then they end up on Pesach. So is this the same year? What's the answer? I don't know. I don't know. But whenever you can build a conspiracy theory, why not? Why miss a theory? So therefore you realize that this Mishnah in Maaseh Sheni, which unfortunately we never would have seen other than this, is actually interesting just in terms of what it may or may not give us in terms of the background of our story. Yeah. There is actually a whole literature of boat stories. One of the people who was completely intrigued by this is Professor Danny Sperber, who won the Israel Prize. He's written about the various boat stories. He's written about nautical terms in the Talmud and things like this. And if you want, we can ask him to come in, give us a guest talk, and explain all these things. But either way, what we see is Rav Tzvi Hirsch Chias is already questioning, right at the end of Surah Shem's, he goes, I don't know
Where'd you go? What?
In source number 7, I'm saying he was already questioning what were they all doing here. So one answer, what are they doing here? They just got off the boat. They just go to the boat. How far can you travel? They couldn't all go to especially those who lived up north. You couldn't get up north, so they're all over here and spend Pesach together with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva again calls his wife and says, "Listen, I'm bringing some guests for put some more, put some more water in the soup." That's it. So as I said, I don't remember the first time I saw somebody make that suggestion, but as much as you can have this whole conspiracy that they're planning the Bar Kochba rebellion, and by the way, once you continue with that, then you can say, so why is Rabbi Gamliel not there? Because Rabbi Gamliel, he's part of the establishment, and therefore he's anti, and so on. And you can make anything up that you want to. I don't know the validity of any of this, including even that that's what they were possibly discussing. By the way, why not just say that what they were really discussing was what it says, and that's Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, and that they were talking. There were rabbis who were performing the ritual of the Passover Seder. I mean, you could say that. I mean, again, it's much more exciting to say other things and then to look for all kinds of other intrigue. But as I said, there are those who try to take this and stick it together with the boat story, and why not? They arrived Erev Pesach, they're still on the boat. It could be that before Shkia they get off the boat, and how far can they get? They end up in Bnei Brak. I mean, part of what Rav Tzvi Hirsch did is he raised the problem in terms of one of the attendees, and that's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer prefers to be at home. By the way, I can throw on top of everything else, wasn't he put in Cherem, which means what's he doing with everybody else anyway? I mean, I could ask other questions, so you have to say that was before and so on. And again, the other thing is Rabbi Tarfon shows up over here. And by the way, maybe Rabbi Tarfon was on the boat also, but he wasn't as interesting because he wasn't a Levi and he wasn't an Ani and he wasn't whatever. The other problem, there's multiple problems. One of the other problems is, aside from, as he points out, he focused on Rabbi Eliezer, who said, no, you should be home. So if you should be home, why are you here? What's our answer? You just got off the boat. Good. Was he on the boat? Okay, so let's then continue. The other problem would be, and this is much more famous and much more to the point and much more to the story and much more to the continuation of it, and that's Eliezer ben Azariah, which means why or how easy was it for Eliezer ben Azariah to be at Rabbi Akiva's Seder? Now, before you say anything else, we do appreciate that in our world today, if somebody has any minhagim slightly different from us, then we start going into like these major existential crises, and what in the world's going to be. I'm not even going to go to things like kitniot or so on and so forth. That if somebody may have some other, you can go to your Gebrukst or you can go to whatever. People have different customs, so that just sets us off completely. By the way, maybe Rabbi Eliezer was very smart and says, "Stay home for the holidays. Don't get involved with other people." But Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah and Rabbi Akiva have a different problem, and that is really going to be seen in source number 9. And number 9 starts off in the Gemara. It's brachot. In a certain sense, we're still there in the first Mishnah in brachot, and it goes down to when do you say Shema at night. So let's start with an observation which is not going to be absolute. Midnight is not really a Jewish thing. Midnight is, who's midnight with the pumpkin and the Cinderella? Midnight's a Cinderella thing, right? It's much more prominent in Cinderella than it is in halacha. Now, those of you who are clever and can work hard and can search and can find, maybe you'll find. Actually, we have a whole song about things that are midnight. Around midnight, it's also, is that Eric Clapton also? After midnight. So we got Eric Clapton over here. People know Eric Clapton better than Mishnah and Ma'aser Sheni. Okay, very good. Embrace it. That midnight. By the way, all those things and that's in there. None of them are at midnight. They're all in the night, and we say, "Oh, look at midnight. This is chatzot halayla," and then they're not necessarily happened by chatzot halayla. We say it's chatzot halayla, other than makat b'charot. Makat b'charot is something which is apparently connected to chatzot halayla. But I'm going to say it again. It's not that nothing exists. It's just nowhere nearly as prominent as you may think it is. And that's really the backdrop to understand this. Kriyat Shema Arvit, v'halel b'leili p'sachim, v'achilat Pesach, mitzvatan ad sheyaleh amud hashachar. Now, what did this really just now say? What it really said is that midnight's not a thing, for real. And the various things that you may think that we can only do until midnight, midnight's there as a way of keeping you away from breaking the halacha. Don't do it the last minute. Right? We always do things don't do it the last minute. So therefore, Kriyat Shema, at night, you can really say to the morning. Hallel on Pesach, you can really say till the morning. Eating the Korban Pesach, which may be connected to the Hallel, you could do this in the morning. All of these things are till Amud HaShachar, as long as it's night. These are laws of the night, and you could do it from the beginning of the night to the end of the night. So get straight off the Gemara says, Omer Yosef, Lokasha, Harbi Lezman Azariah, Harbi Akiva. No, there's an argument about this, and there's two different opinions. Lezman Azariah and Harbi Akiva. Now keep in mind where we started, and they're sitting at the same Seder. That's part of what's interesting. Titania va'achol debasa b'layla hazeh. It says you should eat the meat on that night. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah omer ne'emar kan b'layla hazeh ne'emar lahalon v'varti be'eretz Mitzrayim b'layla hazeh. It says b'layla hazeh when you should eat the Korban Pesach. It says that God is going to strike them b'layla hazeh. When does God strike them? Lahalon ad chatzot avchan ad chatzot. That just like the striking of the firstborn, which was called b'layla hazeh, was at midnight, so too eating the Korban Pesach is till chatzot. And by the way, that would make it somewhat unique among the korbanot. I said, I'm not saying absolutely, but somewhat unique. Rebbi Akiva, I would look for an erma b'chipazon. But it said the word chipazon when we rushed. Ad shad chipazon. Imkein ma tamud lo malayla. Yochel yehi nechol kikadshim bayom. Maybe it should even be allowed the next day. Tamud lo balayla. Balayla hu nechol v'lo bayom. That all night you can eat it, but not the next day. V'hani tanai kahani tanai. Detanya sham tizbach pesach v'erev kivo hashemesh moed tzedcha. You can eat it until the sun comes up, the time that we left Egypt. Rabbi Lezer Omer be'erev atazoreach u'kivo shemesh eta ochel u'moed tzedcha mitzrayim eta soref. That you burn. This is Rabbi Lezer, by the way. You burn in the morning. So be'erev atazoreach u'kivo shemesh eta ochel. That means at sunset. You would eat it. U'moed tzedcha mitzrayim eta soref. Then anything left over would be burnt. Rabbi Yeshua Omer be'erev atazoreach u'kivo shemesh eta ochel v'ad matay eta ochel v'holech. Ad moed tzedcha mitzrayim. I mean, Rabbi Hakol modim. Everyone agrees. Ki shenigalu Yisrael mitzrayim lo nigalu lo be'erev. The Jews were redeemed at night, so, as it says. Shenemar hotziach Hashem l'kem mitzrayim laila. Uki sheyatzu. But when did they leave? So now we just made a distinction between geula and between yetziat mitzrayim. Lo yatzu ela b'yom. Shenemar mimachrat Pesach. The next day after the Korban Pesach, or the holiday of Pesach, Yatzu B'nei Yisrael b'yad ramah. By the way, that's really interesting because now we realize there's two different holidays. Why? Because there's two different events. We don't know when Pesach is over. Is it over at midnight? Is it over in the morning? With Elazar ben Azariah, it's at midnight. And or Rebbi Akiva would, and then, right, there is overlap, obviously, because when the sun sets. See, I'll tell you what part of the issue is, just in case we're not being clear. We all know that Jewish holidays begin at Shkia, they begin at nightfall, and they end at nightfall. But the Beit HaMikdash, it's the other way around. The night follows the day. So the Korban is, in Judaism, we always say that first is the night and then the day, but in the Beit HaMikdash, it's first the day and then the night. So what we have over here is two separate things. We have the Korban Pesach, which is a ritual, which is a Korban, and therefore first the day, it's brought during the day, and then it's eaten at night. On the other hand, the holiday of Chag HaMatzot is like all the other holidays. It starts at night, and then it continues out the other way around. So then when is going to be the overlap? The overlap between the Pesach and Chag HaMatzot is going to be that night, which is both the night, the time to eat the Korban Pesach, and already the time of Chag HaMatzot, and then you have, again, this really interesting overlap between the two, but we also have different holidays. And by the way, just to make everything more complicated, we also have leaving in the morning, but we also have the seventh day. The seventh day is also part of the 7-day holiday Chag HaMatzot, and there's also something significant that happens over there, so hopefully we have everything lined up. But now we realize that this discussion about Shema, until when you say Shema at night, and can you say it past Chatzot, or it can be said until the dawn. So what we learn is that we really can say dawn, but Elazar ben Azariah say no, that there is midnight's a thing, and therefore the Korban Pesach is only in towards midnight. So therefore, as far as we're concerned, this then will take us to another problem, and that is, how does Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, how are they having the Seder together? Because if it's not clear, there's actually two other things which are probably interrelated to this, is that one, some of us will be under pressure, you have to look, when's Chatzot, you have to eat the Afikom before Chatzot. Some of us are actually a little bit more knowledgeable. We'll know, we do that as a chumrah or as maybe more than a chumrah, but the hallel goes together. The hallel's not separated, and the hallel the hallel's broken up. We have a hallel which is said before the meal and a hallel after the meal. So, by the way, before we eat the Korban Pesach and after we eat the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach should have been done together with a Hallel, which means if I have to eat the Afikomen in place of the Korban Pesach before Chatzot, I probably have to say Hallel before Chatzot as well, and I probably have to finish everything before Chatzot, which is obviously or clearly for a lot of us going to be a challenge. If you want, I could tell the famous story about Rabbi Lichtenstein, whose there was lots of talking during the Seder, and by the time they finished eating the matzah before they started the meal, he goes, oh, we have to have the Afikomen now, and miss the whole meal. To which his wife, Tova Soloveitchik, said to him, Aaron, I was also raised in an Orthodox home, and we can have our meal, right? So, as I said, that's whether my brother may have been there for that Seder. I have to ask him, but yes, why? Because ultimately we hold like Rabbi Akiva, but nonetheless, according to Elazar ben Azariah, you should have finished the Afikomen, not the Korban Pesach at that point, but there's also, and you should have said already the Hallel, and there's also, and have the 4 cups of wine, and essentially you should have finished the Seder. The mitzvah of Sipur Tzarayim Kol Halayla is only if you follow the opinion that whole night is part of Pesach, because Pesach is connected to the halachot, or the halachot are connected to the story, and all these things are interrelated. But if you're telling it ends at midnight, then everything ends at midnight. And by the way, that's now more interesting, because Rabbi Elazar sitting with Rabbi Akiva. Now, by the way, you could right now say, Rabbi Elazar is a good guest. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he's a good guest. Rabbi Akiva is the Maradat. Rabbi Akiva is the rabbi of Bnei Brak. And even though people also overstate this. He was the Nasi. He wasn't necessarily the Nasi that day. That could be before he was the Nasi. He was after he was the Nasi. 1 in 4 weeks he was the Nasi. Those of you who know what I'm talking about, which by the way is all the same characters. It's Rabbi Gamliel gets disposed. Maybe Rabbi Akiva we should put there. No, Rabbi Yeshua is the one who gets insulted, and that's. I'm saying it's all the same people involved. And maybe Elazar ben Azariah was. Maybe he wasn't the Nasi at that point. Nonetheless, that he would say, okay, let me respect Rabbi Akiva. And by the way, I gotta go a step further. And let's say we talk about leaving Egypt after Chatzot. It's Bittul Torah. Okay. So I'm just saying is that the fact that Elazar ben Azariah is there is not necessarily going to be as strong as of a question as some people try to make it. Okay, this is not his custom. So hopefully, you know what? Maybe he snuck off on the side, ate his afikomen before Chatzot, and then was a very good guest afterwards. I know it's not Jewish tradition to be a good guest, but maybe he was a very good guest. He was wise beyond his years, if you will. By the way, the Yerushalmi says that his hair turned white. His beard. The Yerushalmi says his hair turned white, as opposed that his beard turned white. It also says, I believe that he was 16, not that he was 18, and whatever. Let us continue. So all of this we took out of source number 9. Source number 10 takes us to the end of Masechet Pesachim again. B'chol dover dor chayv and l'rero datzmo ki'ilu hu yatzah mitzrayim shenemar v'yigaret l'vincha b'yomahu le'mo b'vor zeh asoshin l'teit Mitzrayim lefichach, if you have to see yourself, lefichach anachnu chayavim lodot lalelu shebeich l'fer l'romein l'der l'vreich l'leu l'kales l'misha asal if we just have to see ourselves if we left, but the Rambam adds, we have to see ourselves as if we were slaves and as if we left. It's not just the leaving, also the servitude. We should see ourselves, which I don't know if it's clear in the Gemara. Ad heichen hu omer, until when, meaning how far do you have to say in the Hallel? So Beit Shammai omim ad ema ben b'smecho, Beit Hillel omim ad chal mishlam ad imayim. I reserved the right to return to this at some later date to explain what their argument is. V'chotem begeula, and then you seal this by saying the bracha of the geula. Rabbi Tarfon Omer. Now we've moved over to one of our other members of this meal. Asher ga'alnu v'ga'alat avotenu b'Mitzrayim, who has redeemed us and redeemed our forefathers, which, by the way, sounds, to a certain extent, perfect. That's what it said, that we have to see ourselves if we left, so therefore God redeemed us. We have to sing, and we say the bracha that God redeemed us, because we just experienced redemption. And we say that God redeemed our forefathers, so everything's perfect, right? Rabbi Tarfon makes perfect sense. V'lo hayachotem, Rabbi Akiva omer, Ki Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu yagi'enu l'moadim v'leregalim acherim aba'im l'reknenu shalom smeichim b'vinyan irecha v'sasim be'avodatecha v'nachal sham min azvachim u'min apsachim ad, right, v'sothin Baruch Atah Hashem ga'al Yisrael. Rabbi Akiva is not just talking about the present, Rabbi Akiva is talking about the future. And that becomes very interesting because now I can actually begin to wonder something. That Rabbi Akiva, when he talks about celebrating leaving Egypt, he's talking about not just that moment that the firstborn was struck. He's already moving towards the future, towards the morning, and so on. And over here as well, where Rabbi Tarfon, on the one hand, you could say, wow, look how much he's extending himself by saying it's not, we see ourselves if we left, and it's not just the past, it's the present as well. And Rabbi Akiva, no, it's not just the present, it's also the future. And this may be the key to at least understanding part of what's going on over here. The famous story, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, which is the Gemara at the end of Makot, source number 11. It's the Gemara in Makot. This is the famous story where, of course, it's Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva, right? All of the people also involved in that other story. They go up and they see the destroyed Jerusalem. I'm not going to, again, we all know the story. And we get to the end of the story. Rabbi Akiva is saying, well, till that prophecy came true, I didn't know this prophecy. But what actually is he saying? And what is the prophecy? The prophecy is that Jerusalem will be in ruins and Jerusalem will be rebuilt. So I want to skip to the very end, which is right on page 3, right, the end of source 11, when it says, what's Zechariah's prophecy? Right next time, you see elderly people walking around the streets in Jerusalem. That is the, right? We can do this in this classroom even. Sorry. This is a fulfillment of a prophecy.
That's us.
That's us. And children playing, that's us, right? Children playing in the streets. So Rabbi Akiva says, right, Now it's interesting because Rabbi Akiva here doesn't talk about the future, but he talks about the redemption from the future taking place in the present. And B'lashon hazeh amru Akiva nechamtanu. By the way, the Aruch HaShulchan, in his commentary to the Agada, he says, why were they all with Rabbi Akiva? Because Rabbi Akiva is an optimist. It's good to be with people with good energy. Everyone else, the situation is so bad, and what's going to be, and so on and so forth. And Rabbi Akiva is there. He says, okay, I see the future redemption. But it doesn't see it as the future. I mean, that's the whole point. That's the whole point. When you go back and really think about the argument of Akiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and you really think about the argument of Akiva and Rabbeinu Tarfon over here, they're standing in the present. And they're standing in the present. Rabbi Akiva is off in the future, but he thinks the future is the present. And that's really the gift. That's really the gift of optimism, is being able to, and that's feeling the future redemption. And that really, in a sense, is remarkable. But I want to fill this in and say a couple more things. By the way, just notice, you said before we started that you never heard of this Rabbi Maimon. So I told you that he learned with the Aruch HaShulchan, he got smicha from the Aruch HaShulchan, and the Malbim adopted him. So let's look at the Malbim. This is just aesthetics. He writes on the pasuk in Devarim, Vasita Pesach LaHashem Lakecha, Umashak Hotziach Halayla. That was the whole thing quoted in the Gemara, that we were taken at night, but we really weren't taken at night. We left in the morning. So what is Geula? What is Yitzia? And so on. So he says, Ratzalomer Sha'az Nitan Lem Reshut Miparo L'Lechet. There was a moment the Paro says you can leave. That itself is redemptive. V'heim Lo Holchu Ad Hayom. They didn't leave until the morning. V'chein Omer B'Brachot Melamed Shach Hatchila lahem geula mibe'erev. The beginning of the redemption is at night. V'Pesach hayazocher al hatchalat hageula, and the Pesach is there to commemorate the start of the geula. V'alza'amar hotziacha laila v'hamatzah hayazecher al hemshech yimei hageula. And the matzah is about the rest of the redemption. Shelo neshama ad shvi shel Pesach shetavua mitzrim biyan l'chein matzah shiva. So the 7-day holiday is till the completion. They're all about redemption. So when is the redemption? But he actually uses an interesting term over here, and the term is the beginning of the redemption. The Hebrew that he uses is the hatchala hageulah. We'll come to the Aramaic for that in a moment, but first let me just point something out that you already know, but then you're going to see something which the Gemara does with it, and then it will fit into something else that you already know, but you won't realize that's what the Gemara was doing. Okay? Source 13. 13 is simply, I took the first 8 of the Shemona Esrei Brachot, which are really 19, and I just put numbers by them. Number 1, Magen Avraham, 2, Machai Metim, 3, Kel HaKadosh, 4, Chonen Dat, 5, Rotzeh B'Shva, 6, Chonen Mabar L'Sloach, 7, Goel Yisrael, which is that what we have to focus on. Gemara, 14. Gemara Gil Daf Yud Zayin, Amarava, Mitoch Shatidin Ligael B'Shviit. He says that there's a tradition that the Jews are going to be redeemed B'Shviit, in the 7th year. Lefichach Kavua B'Shviit. Therefore, the bracha, Goel Yisrael, was put at the 7th bracha. So again, you did not realize that those two traditions come together, that when you had 18 or 19 brachot to put it in, how do you know which sequence you put them in? So there is a tradition that the 7th sabbatical year in the cycle, that's when redemption takes place. That's why it's the 7th bracha. Lefichach kavu b'shvit v'ha'amar mar. But there's another opinion. B'shishit kolot, in the 6th year, there's going to be noise. Again, that requires interpretation. B'shvi'it milchamot, but in the 7th there will be wars. B'motzoi shvi'it ben David ba, and then Mashiach will come. So the Gemara answers, and this is the only time in all of Shas that this phrase is used. Milchama nami itchaltu de geulahu. Milchama nami itchaltu de geulahu. That war is also the beginning of the redemption. Which means the only time that it talks in the Gemara about this concept called itchaltu de geulah is here. And what is the context of saying that war is the beginning of the redemption? What's the context? Is the Goel Yisrael. Where do you talk about redemption? Now, if you look at Rashi, in 15, Rashi's on the words, Shavua, in the 7-year cycle, Sheben David Ba, Chaluk Mishar Shanim, Kedemar B'chelek, Shana Rishona, Ra'av, right, Ad V'shim Melchamot, V'matzai Shvi Ben David Ba, Yitchalta de Geula, Hi V'yafagav Dehai Geula Lav, Geula de Galuti. It's not the complete Geula from exile. There are stages to Geula. Daha, and now what he's really doing is he's telling you, look at some of the other brachot in the Amidah, right? You have brachot kibbutz, right? Nikabetz Chai Yisrael, Ubinyan Yushalayim, V'tzemech David, which means we have a lot of things we need to do. We have to gather the exiles, and we have to build Jerusalem, and then we have to have the Tzemach David, the remnant from the family of David, Mashiach come. Yesh l'kol achad v'achad bracha la'atzma levad migula zu. V'ilo hachik haven the shem gula lav kavua b'shviyit. And therefore, that's how they picked number 7, because of this rabbinic tradition. So I'm going to say this is really interesting because we see their stages. Now, this point that maybe you noticed, and I deliberately brought this, was that war is the beginning of redemption, is because war is an upheaval. An upheaval, things which kind of moving slowly suddenly get turned over, picked up, thrown on the ground, and shattered, and then you start completely anew. That it's an upheaval. And that's really what this Gemara says. Now, the Gra in source 16 says, going back to our tension about is Akiva, is it at night or is it in the morning? Meaning the Malbim already did this. Right? Even though the Malbim's after. He's after the Gra. But this idea to attach the phrase "etchalta de geula" by the night, or "hatchalat hageula," is that that's the beginning. But there are stages to redemption. Sha'am Moshe l'power b'layla im tirtzu leftor b'yad min hamakot amar lehem b'nei chormata u'lemachrat be'etzem hayom yatzum Yisrael miMitzrayim b'yad ramah. Pidyan sheYisrael mimakat b'chara. It's really interesting because part of what I was pointing at along the way, halacha, also the idea of pidyon haben. Pidyon haben with the firstborn. The firstborn is because the Makat B'charot, that commemorates about what happened at midnight. And that's Pidyon, which is really what he's focusing on. There's Pidyon Mitzrayim, and then there's Yitziat Mitzrayim. Pidyon Mitzrayim is when we're redeemed. We're redeemed, and that's why Mitzvah of redemption follows it. On the other hand, Yitziah is what takes place the next day. By the way, once it takes place the next day, when do we celebrate the next day? We start to celebrate the next day the night before, which means when is Pesach? Sorry, I have to change that. When is Chag HaMatzot? Chag HaMatzot is a 7-day holiday. It wouldn't start like all of our holidays, which already starts in the evening because of an event that happened during the day, because of the way we celebrate holidays. Beit HaMikdash holidays. So therefore, we get to this wonderful time that the Pesach starts when you can bring the Korban Pesach, and then you can eat the Korban Pesach like all other Kudshim at night. You can eat the Kudshim at night, and then till when you can eat it, well, the reality is until the morning, but Relazar Bazari says, no, till midnight, because midnight is when all the drama takes place. But as far as Rabbi Akiva is concerned, is that Rabbi Akiva is already looking and seeing and feeling into the future, and therefore, Rabbi Akiva doesn't freeze frame it on that particular moment. And as I said, we see something, therefore, interesting with Rabbi Akiva. I'm going to end with I'm going to say one or two. We have time. We have nothing else to go. We're good. So let's continue then a little more. The Tosefta is interesting because it talks about when you say Shema at night, and now this will fit in as well. At night you have to, during the day, not at night. Tosefta is talking about saying Shema during the day, and it says that you should mention Tziyat Mitzrayim. And Acherim Orim, at the end of the line, Tzarech Laskir Ba Makapi Charot for Kriyat Yamsuf. That we need to mention both of these things. The Chazdei David, who is a commentary on the Tosefta, you see he lived 1718 to 1790, he writes, V'acherim Sorim ki itzchalt geula hayta b'makat b'charot v'shlamata geula hayta b'kriyat Yamsuf. Again, the same concept that they're saying is that leaving Egypt is one of stages of redemption. I'm saying that's what we say. We say it every day in the Shemona Esrei, 3 times a day, but we never pay attention to it, right? I don't know how many answer hold it. What is OUisrael doing all the way over there, and we don't find the other parts of Geula? No, there's stages to Geula. There are stages that take place, and the Jews already were redeemed the night before, and then it continues. The Gra, because they're stages. It's because they're stages, and part of it, you're right. Part of all this is going to be a question of language. What do we mean by redemption? What do we mean by Geula? That's actually going to be a part of the problem. And good. I'm glad you asked this, and maybe we can now say this a little differently. Maybe Elazar ben Azariah, who's saying, no, it's only till midnight, is looking at the hand of God punishing the Egyptians, or he's looking at it until we can finish eating the Korban Pesach. That would be really interesting. When do you eat the Korban Pesach? Until midnight, which means he's focusing on a religious development. And Rabbi Akiva is talking about actually leaving Egypt right in the morning, and maybe Relazar Azariah is saying, no, that's not religious, that's national. Maybe that's political. It's national. By the way, it's the hand of God in both cases. It's the hand of. But are we focusing when we talk about? 1 second. Are we focusing on the religious aspect that we brought the Korban Pesach, or are we focusing on that we leave Egypt? So, which is the redemption? Is it something which is more? Is it something which is more religious? Something which is more national? And I can see somebody say, no, we're religious Jews, and we look at the Korban Pesach, and that's what we're focusing on. And Rabbi Akiva, and that's not all that surprising. Then is going to say, no, it's until we actually leave. The religion is great, but there's another part of all of this. But give me a couple seconds. There's a little bit more here. So one is, it's interesting in source 17 and 18, we talk about the Makat Bechorot. We talk about the Makat Bechorot should be part of what we say when we say the Shema. It's interesting that the Chazdei David sees this as far as he's calling it the Chaltut Geula. Right? And the completion of the Geula is Kriyat Yamsuf, and that again is interesting because now we have the whole 7-day holiday, that we're able to see. This also may be connected in a completely different way to the Vilna Gaon's comment that has to do with Purim. the difficult Gemara about Purim says Mechai vinish levsumei adelo yada bein Ar Haman levarach Mordechai, and what does it mean? You have to drink so much. You don't know the difference. Ar Haman barach Mordechai. How do you drink so much? People have tried. It's a little hard to get to that amount of drinking. So the Vilna Gaon says, what does that mean? So that's in source 19. This is commentary to the Shulchan Aruch. Chayev Mechayev inish levsumei v'ratzolomar bein nekamat Haman the Gdulat Mordechai, that you drink and you analyze a philosophical question. What is the main part of this of being saved on Purim? Is it that the wicked finally pay their due and are punished, or is it that the righteous are going to be rewarded? Which means we have two sides of the same philosophical problem, and that is tzaddik viralo virasha v'tovlo. So when it comes to Purim, he sees this as you drink and contemplate. Which is the greatness of Purim? That Haman got his due, or that Mordechai got rewarded? And that's really interesting, because now I can take that back and say, is it Makat Bechorot, that the Egyptians now suffer, or is that we leave? Which is the main thing that we're celebrating on Purim, on Pesach? Is it the Makat Bechorot? Is it that midnight? Is it that they're being punished, or is it that we are leaving and that we are being rewarded? So again, I'm reading this Vilna Gaon's question, and I'm hearing something else with it. Last thing I want to discuss today. You see, I have a whole page on it, but we'll touch it a little bit. In source number 20 is the famous four lashonot of Geula: V'otzeti, v'yitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti. In source 21, the Gemara says, TORAH and Rebbi, with that fourth cup, Gomer Alava Tahalel, which means the four cups divide the Seder into different parts. So one of the parts of the Seder is the Hallel, and it says here that's the fourth cup, right? The Hallel Gadol, Va'omer Hallel HaGadol, Div Rebbi Tarfon. And then forget whatever comes afterwards. Rashi, in 22, writes, Hachi Gersinan, Rebbi Gomer Tahalel. No, the right text is the Rebbi, but by the way, that's our text. But Rashi's telling us this is the right text, so what do you now know? That there's another text. If you look at the Rif in source 23, TORAH Chamishi Omer Lava Tahalel. Halal Gadol. He says in the fifth cup. Right. So this is the start of something which is really, really interesting. That in source 24, the Ran is going to tell us, based upon the Baal Ma'or, that actually Rabbi Tarfon argued with the Mishnah. Because the Mishnah said that even a poor person, you give them 4 cups of wine. Rabbi Tarfon said, no, you give them 5 cups of wine. Which means as much as we like everything to line up in 4s, Rabbi Tarfon says, no, there's 5. But this is what Rashi is saying, no, the right text is that there's 4. And now we see that the Rif is saying, by the way, it may really come down to the difference between Ashkenaz and Sfard. It may come down to Surah and Pumbedita. It may come down to, again, just 2 different schools of thought. And then we're going to end up with some people saying 4, some people saying 5, and some people having a nice compromise. So, for example, in the Rambam in 25 will have the compromise. No, you pour the 5th one, but you don't drink it, and that's the Koser Shalayahu, and that's what the Rambam says in source 25. V'yesh l'lemzog kos chamishi. V'lomar or love halal hagadol. So you realize that that's really close to what Rabbi Tarfon said. V'kosa eino chova kamo arba kosot. Which is not the same kind of thing. The Ravid, on the other hand, that's in source 26, the Ravid, which is not on the Ravid on the Rambam, it's the same Ravid, but there were 3 different Ravids, the same Ravid, but he writes this in different places, and here he says, Keneged Heveti, because in that source, number 20, the 4 Lashonot was the 5th one, Veheveti. And Veheveti means to come to the land. So it's interesting now that Rabbi Tarfon, who had talked about the present tense, the Geula in the present tense in the past, now we find that Rabbi Tarfon has a 5th cup. So now the question is, where does that 5th cup come from? Now the Ravid, by the way, himself in source 27 has a long explanation for where it's from. I'm not going to look at that. I'm going to prefer to look at the Torah Tamima in source 28. Torah Tamima is the son of the Aruch HaShulchan, who we had cited earlier, and he writes, Uma shelo tiknukos Hoda ala inyan veheveti etchem el aretz. Why don't we have a 5th cup? Whether he knew about I don't know what to say, what he knew, what he didn't know. You can't say that entering Israel is not part of the Geula. Sherei kamokein tiknu le'inyan v'lakachtam etchem li la'am shehu gamkein Eino me'inyan gula. I mean, the Lakachti is really about Matan Torah. That's what it sounds like. So it's not all about leaving Egypt. Yesh lo mapashum mnei shebahiyoto ata bigalut, because now we are in exile. Va'aretz misura b'dei zarim, and the land of Israel is controlled by strangers. Efshar lisa kos yain al zeh. How can we possibly have a fifth cup and celebrate ve'eveti? V'ulai lezecher zeh tiknu kos miyuchad l'shmo shel Eliyahu. Maybe that's why the kos Eliyahu is a zikron v'remez she'anu mikavim lebiato, that we're hoping that Eliyahu will come. And one day that the land will be populated and the people of Israel will come back to life. What an unbelievable statement over here. So let me say two things and I'm finished. One is, some say that's why it's called Kos Eliyahu, because there's machloket. Is there 4 or 5 Eliyahu going to come and tell us which one is right? So that's what some people theorize. That's why it's Kos Eliyahu. On the other hand, what he's saying over here is that the fifth cup, and he's not talking about, again, there was an argument. Maybe, we can say it like this, that all these rabbis had a Seder together with Rabbi Akiva. And they're nice and they're polite. Why? Because they're nice rabbis and they're polite and they respect one another and they have different customs, and some eat kitniot and some eat gebrukst and some don't, although hard to believe that no one ate gebrukst then. But anyway, everybody is very well behaved. And Rabbi Akiva is an optimist. And Rabbi Akiva is sitting there, maybe in his kittel, maybe not, with his face shining and talking about the future redemption as if it's right now in the present. And maybe even though Rabbi Tarfon starts the Seder only thinking that you talk about the present tense, and that itself is an avoda, to see yourself as if you're freed. But Rabbi Akiva speaks about the future as if it's the present, so maybe he convinces Rabbi Tarfon that we need to have a fifth cup, because maybe we really can't celebrate the future. But for us who live in Israel and the land has come back to life, and all these negative things that he said why we don't have the fifth cup, maybe it is worthwhile for us not just to pour a fifth cup, but also to drink it as well, and to celebrate, and you can have grape juice for the fifth cup also, and to celebrate all the things that the Torah says that we're missing. And all the things that it sounds now, again, those two traditions, some couldn't even believe there would be Tarfon can possibly go there. There's a fifth cup about Veheveti, and sitting in exile, how can you talk about Haveti? But maybe when we're no longer sitting in exile, maybe we can absolutely celebrate Haveti. We've seen that redemption goes in. We've seen, first of all, Pesach is celebrated in different ways. And we see that there are stages to redemption. And we see that war is an upheaval and war is a part of redemption. And every single day we talk about OUisrael in the 7th bracha because of that upheaval, because that's the beginning of the process. And we know the other stages. And we don't necessarily always know what's going to be the proper sequence. But we do realize that a lot of those brachot that we've been saying for generations, a lot of those blessings have come to fruition, and now we realize that we're in the midst of our upheaval, and we hope that very quickly and very peacefully, and without having to pay any more korbanot, that we get to this final stage, and that God will allow all of us to celebrate this completion of this redemption that we started to celebrate all those years ago.